We welcome you all to our May Meetup. Meetups, as some of you know, are a way for us to come together to explore, understand, and advocate for issues that matter to us. They are focused on our members and their interests. We are open to all, so invite friends to join our meetups at any time. Also, I wanted to point out that membership in the League of Women Voters is open to anyone who is eligible to register and vote. You will find membership information on our website by clicking the red join button. I have some announcements before we begin. We have one other Zoom session that's going to be coming up on Thursday, May 27th at 7 p.m. I will be presenting information on the California League of Women Voters criminal justice position. Our local league proposed that the League of Women Voters of New York concur with the position. Barbara Thomas and I prepared all the materials required and lobbied other local leagues to also recommend the position. Happily, 13 other leagues expressed their support, and the League of Women Voters of New York board ended up recommending that delegates adopt the position at convention, which is huge. We're very excited about that. This comprehensive position that delegates, that's not it. This comprehensive position would enable local leagues in New York to speak to a range of police reform and other criminal justice issues. The presentation will be a test run for the session I will be giving in June for the New York delegates, encouraging them to vote in favor of adopting the criminal justice positions. You will find links and the proposed position language on our website. We have also two very important events that are coming up in June and July. On Wednesday, June 16th at 5 to 8 p.m., our annual meeting will be in person. At the Saratoga Spa State Park in the Hawthorne Pavilion. We will conduct the business of the league, approve our budget, adopt our bylaws, adopt our positions, elect our incoming board, among other activities. We will gather rain or shine with whatever food or snacks you bring for yourself. Please also bring a folding chair if you can. The league will provide wine and other cold beverages. If possible, please bring a $10 donation to help defray the expenses of the meeting. See more details on our website, including the proposed budget, our positions, and the proposed bylaw changes, so you are prepared to vote. We look forward to seeing you in person. And then Saturday, July 10th at 9 a.m. to 12 p.m., we have our famous person fundraiser back again, Breakfast with Frederick Dent Grant, portrayed by Ben Camp. And this is also in person. We will be at the Saratoga National Golf Club, the Bluestone Patio Tent. From our website, it says, take a step into the past with Frederick Grant, the oldest son of famed Civil War general and two-term President Ulysses S. Grant. This is a fundraiser. So please spread the word and invite friends to register. And you will find that on our website under events.
And it's Kemp, Ben Kemp.
Thank you. All right, so tonight is our final meetup for the 2020-21 season. We will start up again in September. If you have topic ideas for meetups or other events, please attend, I am told, Tuesday, July 13th. There will be a Zoom planning session. I'm assuming it's a Zoom one. I didn't hear back from Barbara. So I'm assuming that we'll have a link added to our website. So check our events page. This is when we plan our upcoming season. And so if you have a topic that you would like to take the lead on, planning it or presenting, tell us. Oh, there she is. So it's going to be a Zoom session And 7 o'clock? Okay, and it'll be added to our website. It's not on there right now. All right, thank you, Barb. All right, so as always, please stay muted through the presentation. And tonight we're going to be learning about the police reform plans submitted for the county and by local police departments within the county, along with other relevant information. I want to welcome our guest speakers, Sheriff Michael Zurlo and Under Sheriff Richard Castle and Michael Perezioso, I'm probably slaughtering your name, PhD, who is the Commissioner of the Saratoga County Mental Health Center. I also want to express appreciation for all the work done by the police reform task forces comprised of community members, police officers, administrators, civil workers, everybody, who put together the recommendations for the reform plans. Their service to our communities is exemplary. First tonight, we will hear from League of Women Voters member Jackie Pardon, who will present information on the local police departments within the county. I want to acknowledge also the in-depth research done by League member Diane Chechtowicz, I think I said her name right, who likely has at her fingertips reams of information in case there are questions that arise. After Jackie's presentation, we will turn it over to our guest speakers who will talk about the county plans, and then we will end with questions and answers. Questions can be entered into the chat to be read by our chat monitor, Sherry Gray, or depending on time, we may call on individuals to ask their own questions. I turn it over to you, Jackie.
Okay, hopefully you can all hear me. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and show you the plans for municipalities in the Saratoga County. As Lori said, with the exception of the county itself, which will do their own presentation after mine. Okay, so, and I also let me share that now and make sure that happens. Let's see. Okay, you can all see that, right?
Yes, we can.
And you can hear me. Okay. Okay, before I start, I want to point out that on the side, I neglected to number the slides here, but on the side here, if you can all see my slides, they are numbered. And if you take notes for questions after the presentations, maybe it would be helpful to refer to a certain slide. Okay, so this is an overview of the Governor's Executive Order 203, which is the New York State Police Reform and Reinvention Collaboration. And these are plans by municipalities of Saratoga County. But first of all, I want to say the same day that the Executive Order 203 was presented, so the Say Their Name New York State Reform Agenda was voted on and enacted on June 12th, 2020. Signed into New York State law was the Say Their Name agenda, which allows for transparency of prior disciplinary records of law enforcement officers, bans chokeholds across the board through the whole state, prohibits false race-based 9/11 reports, such as what people call the Karen, who called the police on the gentleman when she was walking her dog in, I think it was Central Park, and designating the Attorney General as an independent prosecutor for matters relating to the deaths of unarmed civilians. So this is already law in New York State for everyone. On the same day, Governor Cuomo put out the Executive Order 203, and we'll go over a good bit of it here to explain the, let me get this up here. Okay, so I'll start with the yellow. Whereas, beginning on May 25th, 2020, following the police-involved death of George Floyd, protests have taken place daily throughout the nation and in communities across New York State in response to police-involved deaths and racially biased law enforcement to demand change, action, and accountability. And whereas there is a long and painful history in New York State of discrimination and mistreatment of Black and African-American citizens dating back to the arrival of the first enslaved Africans in America. And whereas a number of incidents involving the police that have resulted in the deaths of unarmed civilians, predominantly Black and African American men, have undermined the public's confidence and trust. Whereas these deaths in New York State include those of Anthony Baez, Amadou Diallo, Ousmane Zangos, Sean Bell, Ramarley Graham, Patrick Dorsman, Akai Gurley, and Eric Garner, amongst others, and goes on to list some of the names in areas outside of New York State in the nation. Whereas government has a responsibility to ensure that all of its citizens are treated equally, fairly, and justly before the law. And whereas recent outpouring of protests and demonstrations have illustrated the depth and breadth of the concern. And whereas Black Lives Matter, and whereas we need urgent and immediate action is needed to eliminate racial inequalities in policing and to develop better practices to better address the particular needs of communities of color to promote public safety, improve community engagement, and foster trust. Each local government entity must perform a comprehensive review and develop a plan to improve such deployment strategies, policies, procedures, and practices for the purposes of addressing the particular needs of communities to foster trust, fairness, and legitimacy, and to address any racial bias and disproportionate policing of communities of color. Okay, so this plan will consider policing strategies, including but not limited to use of force policies, procedural justice, any studies addressing systemic racial bias or racial justice in policing, implicit bias awareness training, de-escalation training and practices, law enforcement assisted diversion programs, restorative justice practices, community-based outreach and conflict resolution, problem-oriented policing, hotspots policing, focused deterrence, violence prevention and reduction interventions, crime prevention through environmental design, and model policies and guidelines by the New York State Municipal Police Training Council and standards by the New York State Law Enforcement Accreditation Program. The political subdivision, the municipality they mean, must consult with stakeholders, including but not limited to the local police force, members of the community with emphasis in areas with high numbers of police and community interactions, nonprofit and faith-based community groups, the local district attorney, the local public defender, and local elected officials, and create a plan to adopt and implement the recommendations resulting from its review and consultation, tailored to the specific needs of the community and general promotion of trust, fairness, accountability, and transparency, and which seek to reduce any racial disparities in policing. So I want to point out here this language, create a plan to adopt and implement the recommendations resulting from its review and consultation. So those are key, that's key verbiage here. Such a plan should be offered for public comment, and after consideration of such comments shall be presented to the local legislative body, which shall ratify or adopt such plan by local law or resolution, which happened on April 1st, 2021. So before I go any further, I want to go over a glossary I'll be using in these slides. I'll refer to the executive order as EO 203. Occasionally, I have to truncate the name Saratoga Springs to SS. SOP is standard operating procedure. MUNI is a short for municipality, which is a city, town, or village. PD for police department. DOJ, the Department of Justice, which is the federal department. And Department of Defense, the federal Department of Defense. Oh, I have something underneath there. Okay, now I want to go over Saratoga County, New York State municipalities as they are set up in our county as well. Within the county, you have cities and townships, and within townships, you have villages. So villages often share the services of the townships. Their police departments are oftentimes the same. Hamlets are also part of townships, but they are not incorporated, not a municipality, and they are not included in this presentation tonight, and neither did they need to come up with any individual plans. So here we have the Saratoga County Sheriff's Office adopted an Executive Order 203 plan, and it covers all the townships because the Saratoga County Sheriff and New York State Police service all towns and also are available to assist other municipal police departments throughout our county. The exception to this is the town of Stillwater, which has its own police department and therefore did its own plan. And I'll be going into that later on, a bit more about that. Now, the municipalities that have their own police departments and so did their own plans, the Village of South Glens Falls, City of Saratoga Springs, Village of Ballston Spa, City of Mechanicville, the Town and Village of Stillwater, and the Village of Waterford. And now I'll go over the census by race, the percentages in the county and different municipalities. So we'll start with Saratoga County. We have in the whole county, 2% Hispanic Latino, 1% American Indian, 1% Black and African American, 1% Asian, 1% other, and 94% of white alone as a race, not mixed. So Saratoga Springs compares with the county as having half as many times a percentage of Hispanic and Latino at 3%, double the amount of Black and African American percentage as the county, the same amount as the county of Asian, and other is 2%. Ballston Spa has more than 1.5 times the amount of Hispanic and Latino as the overall county, and they have American Indian, Asian, and other as very small percentages. The Asian being the only other one that's double the size of the county. I'm sorry, the percentage of the county, not the size. Mechanicville has 2% Hispanic Latino, the same as the county, and the other are all grouped in 3% of that municipality, Mechanicville. South Glens Falls has 3%, are all the other non-whites are grouped in 3% in this county. And then I replaced that with, oh, I'm sorry, the Mechanicville with Waterford because I didn't have any room. Waterford has a huge Hispanic Latino percentage compared to the rest of the county at 9%, double the Black and African American percentage as the county, 4 times the Asian percentage as the rest of the county, and the other multiple are 1%. I'm going to go into the town and village of Stillwater here because they did things a little differently. Their percentage of 98.2 of white alone, and the rest are all less than 1%. Now I highlight them here because Stillwater was the only municipality in our county to adopt new standard operating procedures before the executive order was issued, right after the George Floyd incident, soon after, in the summer of 2020. At that point, they updated their police commission charter, they updated their standard operating procedures on the use of force, use of tasers, domestic violence, mental health crises, body cams and mobile audio, and body armor. After the executive order was given, they adopted, in this May of this year, adjusting patrol schedules to better fit community needs, increase training, and include bias-based policing policy. So I highlighted them here because they were the only ones to do something before the executive order was issued. And now we'll go to, I have a graph of what some of the main features of the municipal plans. Diane and I found it was very difficult to pinpoint a lot of things and compare a lot of things because of different language, different verbiage that was used. So I tried to make it as clear as possible. I'm starting with the establishment of a civilian review board. In Saratoga Springs, that is under review, and we will go over details of that later on. Mechanicville is putting that in, but there is also something to explain about that, which I will do later. Body cam and dash cam. As you can see by my legend, the ones in gray already have had them in place. Saratoga Springs, Mechanicville, Stillwater, and Waterford is putting in body cams as of this plan adoption. Increased bias training in Saratoga Springs, Ballston Spa, Mechanicville, South Glens Falls, and Stillwater plans. Review and revise the use of force policy to comply with the Eric Garner Anti-Chokehold Act about, besides other things. Alternatives to force, increased reporting, investigations, and accountability on the use of force, and we'll explain that also in another slide. So Saratoga Springs has the review the use of force policy in their plan, Ballston Spa, and recently South Glens Falls, Stillwater, and Waterford just implemented a review of that very recently in their standard operating procedures. Okay, review and revise diversity in recruitment. Saratoga Springs, Ballston Spa, South Glens Falls. Increase community outreach, which may include updates on the 203 implementation process, more transparency, accountability, periodic surveys, establish or increase foot and/or bicycle patrols, public meetings, person-to-person interactions via website, portal, and/or individual coffee talks. So those were mentioned in part or total in Saratoga Springs, Ballston Spa, Mechanicville, South Glens Falls, Stillwater, and Waterford. All of them talked about that in their plans. Mental health community and mental health for officers. This one I gave MCMO because these munis 201 included both mental health training and referrals aimed at community members and establishing and increasing mental health resources for police officers. So this is mentioned, both of these, in the plans of Saratoga Springs, Ballston Spa, South Glens Falls, Stillwater, and Waterford. Crime prevention through environmental design. The only one that mentioned this was South Glens Falls, but it is a subject that is very kind of foreign to a lot of us. So I just put in here that you can research it more on yourselves, but it's set up to reduce crime and decrease fear, such as beautification and maintenance, and letting potential criminals know that this is a place that is valued and watched. Increased sight lines, improved lighting, linked walkways between different hoods and shared events, community watch, community policing, officer foot patrols, etc., and fostering ethnic, cultural, income level, and age diversities, which is also very important in keeping crime at bay. And so that, as I said, was mentioned in South Glens Falls as something that they are looking at. Okay, now I want to talk about something that's, before I go on further with these plans, what just passed in the House on March 30, and currently in the Senate. This is the federal Senate and House. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act of 2021. So it's passed in the House already, and we're waiting to see what happens in the Senate. Among other things, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act will lower the criminal intent standard from willful to knowing or reckless to convict a law enforcement officer for misconduct, limit qualified immunity as a defense to liability in civil action suits against a law enforcement officer, and grant administrative subpoena power to the Department of Justice in pattern or practice investigations. So I'm going to go off from this act to explain pattern or practice investigations. They were actually enacted on the national level in 1994 after the Rodney King episode in Los Angeles, California. Pattern or practice investigations aim at systemic problems, not individual officers. They are civil, not criminal investigations. They allow the Justice Department to sue any law enforcement entity that engages in a pattern or practice of conduct that deprives persons of rights, privileges, or immunities secured by the Constitution or laws of the United States. So in the previous slide, we saw that they have strengthened this in this new George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Even though it's been enacted since 1994, apparently it was not doing its job enough. So to go on further with the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, it will also establish a framework to remedy racial profiling by law enforcement at the federal, state, and local levels, limit the unnecessary use of force, restrict the use of no-knock warrants, chokeholds, and carotid holds, create the National Police Misconduct Registry, establish new reporting requirements, including on the use of force, officer misconduct, and routine policing practices. Direct the Department of Justice to create uniform accreditation standards for law enforcement agencies. So up to this time, there have not been uniform accreditation standards throughout the nation, and in some states, even throughout the states. It will require officers to complete training on racial profiling, implicit bias, and the duty to intervene when another officer uses excessive force. So I want to highlight some of the municipalities and what was in their plans. So Mechanical's variation on Civilian Review Board was that they used to have a police civilian Internal Affairs Review Commission, and they will restart it. The mayor will exercise his authority and make appointments to be referred for approval by the city council. The committee, which was previously codified by the city, serves an important function which advances the purposes of Executive Order 203. And again, I want to point out that Mechanicville is the only one that referred to it as a police civilian review commission and not simply a civilian review commission. Okay, the City of Saratoga Springs plan was the most comprehensive and the longest and had the most points. And I'm going to talk about some of the points. And the first thing I'm going to highlight is the 4 items that have not been adopted, but are under review. So again, these are comments by the Saratoga Springs City Council concerning items under review. As to prohibiting no-knock warrants, as was suggested by the task force, these are items under review that were submitted by the task force. And while the city, I'll say here, accepted the task force recommendations, as a whole, these were the 4 items that they had caveats about that they want to still review. So prohibiting no-knock warrants, and the city council stated they are and should be rarely, if ever, utilized, that it always requires application and review by a judge to see if evidence will be destroyed or an officer's life would be in danger. And the city council recognizes the existing debate, including the possible passing of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, banning no-knock warrants in drug cases, which may or may not happen if the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is passed in both houses. The second item under review for Saratoga Springs is terminating paramilitary and other training, fostering violent police department overreach, and prohibiting outside departments entering the city with military equipment. And so in this item, City Council pointed out that Saratoga Springs does not participate currently in DOD 1033, which is the transfer of excess Department of Defense supplies and equipment to state, county, and local governments. Currently does not participate. And they say that current police department training is consistent with state and federal guidelines. And they also say that the city has no authority to control weapons used by county, state, or federal agencies, and no authority to ban them from entering city boundaries. But they state that this is under review. The third item under review by the city of Saratoga Springs is diverting seized assets to community service organizations and restorative groups. The city council pointed out that funds seized through asset forfeiture are strictly governed and must comply with applicable requirements by the state and county and be used for law enforcement purposes. And they also point out that Saratoga Springs has historically received only minimal asset forfeiture funds. The fourth item, the Civilian Review Board. So in their document, the City Council stated they approved the task force recommendation in principle, while calling for an evaluation and review of potential legal, union, charter, and community elements that could impact the ability to adequately develop a civilian review board. The review will be conducted by an independently appointed panel with monthly updates to both the City Council and the public. At the end of the review period, and based on the totality of findings, the City Council, with input from the community, will make a final determination as to a civilian review board. So these are highlights of adopted elements of the Saratoga Springs plan without any caveats or mitigation that we wanted to highlight. As to tasers and other energy and control devices, there will be a more stringent independent review process of incidents, expand the scope of data collected on these incidents, and of data collected and used, and in training and emphasis on preservation of life and minimizing deployment and injury. Again, Saratoga Springs, community-centered reinvention, establishing a collaborative pilot program, where social services will work with, not for, police departments. Invest in innovative biopsychosocial services, mitigating police involvement and encounters, allowing more involvement of behavioral crisis professionals as first responders. Evaluating and developing pre-arrest diversion pilot program, such as there's a state program called CAHOOTS, to reduce police encounters with unhoused and mentally ill individuals. So that is a pre-arrest diversion program for unhoused and mentally ill individuals. And to invest in local programs concerning food and housing insecurity. So this is they're acknowledging that food and housing insecurity plays a great part in policing and criminal activity and restorative justice. Okay, the last one is, transparency and accountability. In that, Saratoga Springs City Council determines to prioritize the development and analysis of race-related data and other demographics, to learn and adopt a culture concerning data and its use, create a public collaborative forum that involves youth, and seek additional resources when available to staff a database manager within the police department, and revise the complaint form and filing process. The last one we'll go over for a highlight of Saratoga Springs adopted plan is training in and in the implementation of restorative justice principles, trained to address racial biases, apply the concept of lead, listening, explaining your actions. Now, this is when they have an encounter. Listening, explaining your actions, equality in actions, dignity and respect for all with whom the police officers interact. And also they determined to partner with local universities and/or scholars, with activist groups and anti-racist organizations to develop programs designed to push both recruits and experienced officers to critically engage with the history and practices of their profession. Okay, so now I will introduce our next guests who will talk about the Saratoga County Plan, Sheriff Michael H. Zurlo and Under Sheriff Richard Castle, and also Michael S. Prezioso of the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services of Saratoga County, an assistant professor of psychiatry at the University of Albany. Okay, so now welcome our next guests.
Well, this is Sheriff Zurlo. Thanks for having myself, the Undersheriff, and Dr. Precioso here tonight to talk about the Executive 203. As you mentioned in your PowerPoint, this was established in June of last year on an executive order that the governor wanted police reform. We took that executive order and through the process, part of the process was to develop a committee to look throughout the county, interview as many organizations and people as possible. And I'll let Dr. Precioso talk about that in a few minutes. To get that started, the chairman of the Board of Supervisors back in October formed that committee. Dr. Precioso was the chairman, Under Sheriff Castle was the vice chairman. We had two supervisors, O'Connor and Richardson. We had our district attorney, our county public defender, and we had a community member, Opal Hines. And like I said, Dr. Precioso can take it from here to explain the whole process and how they came about with the recommended recommendations that we now have. It came out, there was 10 recommendations, and I'll let Dr. Precioso and Under Sheriff Castle take it from this point to walk you through the process and how everything came about, and basically who they spoke to over the course of several months. Dr. Precioso.
Thank you, Sheriff, and thank you all for having us, and glad to have the opportunity to talk a little bit about the process and how we put things together. When the committee was appointed, it was in October this past year, and we had an organizational meeting, and during the course of the discussion there, in addition to taking a look at how our meeting schedules would work and housekeeping items along those lines, really the thrust of what we were looking to do was create opportunities for as many members of the community from as many different viewpoints, backgrounds as we possibly could, have opportunities to give feedback about the different points that were enumerated in the governor's executive order. We did that, and we set out with a series of, it was about 7 or so meetings in person across November and December of this past year. As it turned out, there were different entities that, and different participants in the committee that had contacts with the various members of the community. I, for example, had contact with well over 100 community service organizations related to human services provision. I was able to reach out to that list. DA Karen Hagan had contacts with the faith community. There were contacts made with school settings and school administrators, school superintendents for their participation. We were looking for a number of different opportunities, venues for people to participate. So we went ahead with that, and we scheduled one group essentially per meeting. And we initially weren't quite sure how many people would show. So we set out with an initial guideline of 3 minutes per speaker. And we were in a position where we did have numbers of people showing and presenting, but we also had an opportunity for people pretty much to speak for as long as they wanted to, so that the group could have an opportunity to hear feedback, hear what was being said, ask questions, explore things in different degrees of depth. So we went through this process. We got some feedback along the way regarding our sort of communication modalities. We started with people being able to call in and potentially ask questions through the call-in, but there was a lot of suggestion made along the lines of setting up Zoom meetings. So actually, it's very similar to this. So at the beginning of January, we set up 2 different Zoom meetings to be able to hear just broadly, not just from specific constituency groups, for example, the human service providers, the school superintendents, or groups of that nature, but just the general public to reach out to members of the committee by Zoom. So that was done, and that was done we were based in Malta at the time. It was done remotely, and we got participation. In fact, some of the participants in those 2 meetings had participated in earlier meetings at the county the county's boardroom. They participated again because there was opportunities for more discussion, and they presented their feedback at that point. What we did was copious note-taking and transcripts and stuff that were provided to members of the committee. We had an opportunity to go back through that, and we began trying to collate the different points that were being made, and we're looking for points where there were consistency across the different constituency groups who were giving their feedback, also unique points, and began incorporating that in what was to become our final report. And at that point, we met a couple of times to go through a couple of drafts of what the report would look like that would be presented. It was presented then to the Public Safety Committee, which moved it to the county's Law and Finance Committee, ultimately for presentation and adoption by the Board of Supervisors. There was the required period of public comment, and I don't recall there being a lot of additional comment being given at that point. So in order to comply with the terms of the order itself, we moved that, and the Board of Supervisors voted on that in March and in preparation for the April 1 deadline. And that's essentially how we did it. We had hundreds and hundreds of responses. Invitations went out to 1,000 different combinations of individuals and community groups. So we feel like we really had a pretty broad reach. Of course, not all of those groups chose to respond, but certainly the opportunity was given, actively extended in terms of the invitations that were given to those groups. I don't know, Under Sheriff, if there's anything that you want to add.
No. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Rick Kessel. I'm the Under Sheriff. Mike Zurlo is Under Sheriff. I've been with the Sheriff's Office for 32 years, and I was very happy to be asked to be part of this committee. Just the one thing I wanted to add is, as you look over our information and compare it to the other some of the other organizations, the Saratoga County Sheriff's Office is accredited by the New York State Law Enforcement Accreditation Program, which is overseen by the Division of Criminal Justice Services in the state of New York. We have been continuously accredited since 1989, I believe it is, which means that not only do we meet or exceed all of the standards set by the state of New York, but that every 5 years we go through a full audit by the state where they come in, look at our policies and procedures, and look at what we're doing and actually make sure that we are in compliance. In Saratoga County, there are only 2 agencies that are accredited, the Saratoga County Sheriff's Office and the Waterford Police Department. So going into this, our policies were already consistent with everything, all the model policies that are established by the state, as you mentioned, as mentioned previously. Also, for about the last 4 years, the Sheriff's Office has been undergoing a process that Sheriff Zurlo started when he came into office of completely going line by line through our policies and procedures. We had a policy and procedure manual that dated back, through my career, and in my 30 years here, we had never done a complete overhaul of the policies and procedures. So we actually brought in an outside consultant consisting of an attorney and a company that assists with these process. And we had been working through the process of making sure that all of our policies and procedures not only met the needs of the Sheriff's Office, but we're consistent with all New York State federal laws and federal laws, Supreme Court decisions, and best practices from around the nation. So the policies that were reviewed by the committee were actually policies that have been redeveloped over the last 3 to 4 years. So all the policies that the committee was looking at had actually already been addressed. Although they were not actually put into effect yet, the policies had already been redrafted prior to Executive Order 203. That process is actually wrapping up. We issued our final, our last few policies this past week, and we're now going through the process of reviewing those with the union members and with the union board as a whole, because some of these policies do require negotiation with the labor unions. And we're hoping to have all the policies fully implemented within the next month or so. So that's where we are as the sheriff's office as far as that. And that's why you may have seen in some of the others that there's a lot of policy stuff that was addressed that wasn't addressed by our committee because it had actually already been addressed prior to the committee being put in place. Doc, do you want to go through the recommendations?
You know what? I had trouble accessing them myself. I don't know if you have them there, but I'd be glad to comment on them if you've got them with you.
I do. Yep, I am right here. So
thanks. I apologize for that, folks. I was just having a little trouble with my computer and was not able to get them. So I apologize.
Okay. Not a problem. So there were 10 recommendations that came out of the committee report. The first is to facilitate and establish an advisory committee to continue to seek public input and community involvement in reviewing policies and procedures utilized by the sheriff's office beyond the April 1st deadline. So the other thing that we wanted as a committee that we kind of discovered through this process was that first, we were dealing with an arbitrary deadline that was set by the governor when he wrote the order that this had to be done by April 1st. So we did not want this to just to be an exercise simply for the sake of going through the exercise to meet that deadline. However, we did have to meet that deadline to get something established. The understanding of our committee was that we were not going to be able to necessarily solve all of these issues by April 1st, but it was important that we set a standard and came up with a plan going forward to how we can continue to address these issues. So our sheriff, Sheriff Zurlo, for those who know him, knows that he's very active in our community. We spent a lot of time engaged with community groups since even with the COVID pandemic. We still have had some face-to-face meetings with some groups. We've done some online meetings. The sheriff also very early in his term established a youth advisory committee, which originally was under the sheriff's office and has now been handed off to one of the other departments in the county to oversee it. And it's kind of, it had a little lull here during COVID, but that committee consisted of youth representatives from all the high schools in the county. And it was really a way for them to address, topics important to them and be able to interact with the sheriff's office to express their concerns or express their ideas. So, we've had that going. That is going to start up again as soon as we can, get these kids back together. But with the remote learning and with not being able to have in-person meetings, it's been a little bit difficult over this past year. We have also recently had meetings with a group out of Clifton Park, both from the African American and the Asian community, to discuss issues important to them and to hear about their experiences and their life experiences, as well as their experiences with the sheriff's office and how they feel about the sheriff's office. So it's been a very interesting and learning process. And I need to pause for one moment here. Excuse me.
Yeah, folks, I can add to that. The entire process for the entire committee as we were debriefing, I think we all really appreciated the experience, the opportunity to talk more directly to members of the public, to hear their points of view. It was also interesting along the way to hear that some of the questions raised were things that had already been done, either through the sheriff's office, certainly very proactive with Sheriff Zurlo, but with even other county departments. And one of the takeaways for us was that we all need to do a better job of communicating within the county, within some of the departments, about some of the resources that are available, and also make sure that we communicate the availability of those kinds of things to members of the public also.
Thanks, Doc. So the other thing I wanted to point out that the sheriff has established is the school resource officer program. That came into effect. That became a big issue immediately after the Parkland shooting. We had been in minor discussions about it prior to that, but that really brought it to the forefront. And you know, when the day after that Valentine's Day, when the shooting occurred in Parkland, we had a meeting. And prior, that was in February, and by that June, we had contracts with all but one of the school districts to provide school resource officers. Since that time, we have deployed school resource officers into those districts. It has been a phenomenal success. We now have somebody in the school who's making connections with these students and can bring information back to us. We were well aware of some of the hurdles with programs such as this. We took steps to address them. Many of you have probably heard what is referred to as the school to prison pipeline, where law enforcement in school frequently make arrests and criminalize students. That is not our intention. In fact, our SROs, except in extreme circumstances, are not to make arrests on school property. If it is a criminal activity that has to be referred, it's referred to somebody else. Also, it's very expressly detailed in our contracts that our school resource officers are not part of the discipline system in the schools. So discipline in the schools, short of a major criminal activity, is to be handled by the schools themselves. So the SROs are there for the safety and security of the school, not for investigation of minor infractions by students. The second item on the second recommendation was to encourage the Saratoga County Sheriff to take any steps necessary to maintain compliance with the New York State Law Enforcement Accreditation Program. As I mentioned, we have been continuously accredited for going on 30 years now. We are very excited to maintain that. Not only is the Sheriff's Office accredited, but we are also accredited in our 911 center and our correctional staff. So, all through our agency, we meet these accreditation standards. And those are 3 separate accreditations that are managed by different agencies. However, they function the same way, with an initial accreditation and then a 5-year assessment. To that end, we actually just entered into a new contract to renew our contract with the company that we've been working with for our management of for the development of our policies and procedures. We're also now going to be using services from that company to assist us in managing our accreditation process. It is a daunting task. There are, I believe, 161 standards for law enforcement that need to be met, and we have to maintain separate documentation for each year for each of those standards to show not only what the policy was during that year, but how we complied with that policy. So that's what we're doing going forward with accreditation. We have every intention of maintaining compliance with those standards. That would be any other standards that come out of the New York State Legislature as well. The next item referred to the maintaining policies consistent with the model policies provided by the New York State Municipal Police Training Council. This goes hand in hand with the accreditation. All agencies are required to adopt the model policies that come out from the training council. However, not all agencies are required to be accredited. So the two do go hand in hand, but they are separate entities. There's a recommendation for the sheriff to study and implement training and programs related to topics such as diversity and cultural education, elimination of bias, and de-escalation. The sheriff's office does have a de-escalation training program that's been in use for at least, I believe, the last 3 years now. So we have been working on those items. We are looking into the diversity and cultural education, and we will be relying on some outside resources for that outside of law enforcement to help us identify and review those training curriculums to make sure that they are consistent with what's expected by the public and not just what's expected by law enforcement. The committee recommended that the sheriff explore and develop a body camera and in-car video program for the agency, and we are in the process of doing that. We have already met with the vendor who came and did the demonstration last week. Late last month. We're now in the process of working through the equipment requirements, an audit of what equipment we have, what equipment we will need, and we're hoping to have that in order here very shortly as we can get budgetary numbers, and those will be presented to the Board of Supervisors, who of course would have to approve the expenditure for that equipment, and then we'll also be taking that through in consultation with our law enforcement unions, because there are issues with that are mandatory items of negotiation under state law that we have to address with the union before we can just institute the program. There are also issues along with that. As I like to tell everybody, buying cameras and recording video is the easy part, but there are major considerations that have to be accounted for as far as how the video is stored, how the video is disseminated, as well as the staff necessary for the sheriff's office, the district attorney's office, the courtrooms, and such to deal with this large amount of video. For example, we have around 145 members in the law enforcement side of the sheriff's office. We also have sergeants in the jail that we're looking at equipping with body cameras. So, and we have 65 cars in the fleet. So when you add all those together, we're looking at upwards of 225 cameras that'll be recording video, some 24 hours a day, some only 8 hours a day, but it's a large amount of video that's going to have to be dealt with. I will tell you that the sheriff and I have been considering this for several years. We first proposed this back in 2016 to the board, and it was put on hold back then. We didn't proceed with it. Obviously, it's become more the norm now. We have support of the board members for this. We have support of the rank and file members of the sheriff's office. Several deputies we've talked to cannot wait to have body cameras because they really want, in the event that an incident happens, they really want their side to be told, and they really want a camera on them to show, to show what happened, and in reality, to show the good work that they do day in and day out across our county. There is a recommendation to the sheriff and the board that and the public safety committee of the county to explore the feasibility of creating a professional standards position or group within the sheriff's office to collect and investigate complaints, review and update policies, and audit agency performance. Currently, the sheriff's office, for those of you who have been following us, know that we have grown quite a bit under Sheriff Zurlo during his nearly 8 years in office. And the way we used to handle these things is really not going to work for us going forward. We had more of an ad hoc system where all complaints were handled. Of course, we accepted all complaints were filed, all complaints were investigated. But in a lot of cases, they may or may not have been investigated in a uniform manner. So the plan here is to create a professional standards committee to make sure that all of these are handled in a uniform manner, that everything is properly tracked, that everything is properly reported out, and that will definitely allow us to increase our transparency with the public on any matters that may come to the attention of the sheriff. The committee recommended amendments to policies and procedures as needed to facilitate the collection of additional demographic data on law enforcement contacts to include data related to race and ethnicity. This is something that is going to require some changes on our software end. It's not a heavy lift, but it will need to be done. For example, traffic tickets issued in New York State, they're recorded in the New York State database. Traffic tickets are recorded or issued electronically. The database provided by the state of New York does not have race as a field on a traffic ticket. So when you receive a traffic ticket, your race is not on the ticket. So that data just has never been collected because there's never a field for it. So the software needs to be modified to create a field for that. It has also never been the policy of the sheriff's office to collect that demographic data on day-to-day interactions with the public. So we are updating our policies and we are updating our software to be able to do that. And that will be, or that should be accomplished this fiscal year with no major issues. The committee recommended that the county create and maintain a list of resources for the public and county employees to reference in lieu of contacting or deploying law enforcement personnel for certain non-law enforcement incidents. We have been actively working on that. The plan is to create a website that will be accessible on two sides. There will be a public-facing side with public information that they can reach, and then a law enforcement side that will have both the public information as well as protected private contact information, such as cell phone numbers for people that we work with and so on. This will allow for people to have another resource that they can go to before calling 911 for what may not be an emergent issue. It'll be a resource for our telecommunicators to be able to refer people instead of sending a deputy if it may not be necessary to send a deputy. And it'll also be a place for our deputies on the road to reference for information when they're interacting with members of the public, possibly in lieu of taking someone to the hospital or making a criminal arrest. Currently, we do work with the Mobile Crisis Center of Saratoga County. Mike, I gotta excuse myself for one more second.
Sure, and I can probably pick it up there. The mobile crisis team is actually, it covers both youth and adults. It's a contract that we are engaged in with Northern Rivers. They provide the service across Warren, Washington, Saratoga, Rensselaer, and Schenectady counties. They have clinicians available to triage phone calls. We'll speak to the people involved, and we'll even go directly to a person's place of residence or wherever they happen to be to do an assessment and potentially take steps towards either having the person brought to the hospital on the one hand, or provided with resources for follow-up after the encounter. So it's a good resource.
And I'm sorry, I apologize. For those who have young children or remember having young children, what is an emergency to them sometimes has to take precedence. So I apologize for the interruption. So that's some of the things that we're working on. We're also meeting with Dr. Prezioso and his team to collaborate on some other issues as well. And we're hoping to, we've had good success with the mobile crisis teams so far, and we are really looking to expand on that. That leads us to our next one, which is for the sheriff to continue to engage and support the inclusion of mental health resources in the daily function of the sheriff's office to the benefit of both the community and members of law enforcement. You may remember, as was mentioned in Saratoga Springs, that they were looking at the use of social workers or some semblance of that to respond to calls in lieu of sending law enforcement. That's a great idea, and it is something that we support in some cases and at some level. There's a couple caveats to that need to be considered, and one is that there is a gross shortage of social workers to take on these responsibilities. There are safety concerns for these social workers who would be sent out into the community in some cases. And also at the county level, we are not dealing with a community the size of the city of Saratoga Springs or the town of Waterford. When you're talking about the entire county, from one end of the county, from one end of our county to the other is more than an hour drive. So, to consider how many social workers you would need to have on staff, where you would deploy them, what their response time would be, it's a daunting task. It's not to say that it can't be done. However, there may be a substantial cost to it, and because of the size of our county, you may have to have many more people to cover the size of the county than you actually have work for them to do. And given that there is already a shortage, there's some difficulty with that. there are some options now with, I think everybody over the last year has become more comfortable with telemedicine and with Zoom and things like that. So there are some opportunities that we may be able to tap into to use resources such as that to provide some of these services. But we also do still have an obligation as law enforcement to protect the communities. And when the public calls 911, they have certain expectations, and we need to meet those expectations. We need to make sure that the callers are safe as well as the person who may be in crisis. So those are things that we have to consider in the development of these plans. And there was also the mention of mental health services for law enforcement. We in law enforcement, especially persons like myself who've been here for many years, realized that things needed to change, and they are changing. They are changing slowly. The stigma of mental health is slowly going away in law enforcement. We have established within the last, again, since Sheriff Zurlo came into office, we have established a employee assistance program. We have people that we have sent away to schools to be trained that can respond to assist an officer in crisis, or simply to assist a deputy or other police officer in the county that just needs to talk to somebody, because of a case they handled. We see the best in society, we see the worst in society, and we are all human. So to expect a deputy sheriff to go to a call where they do CPR on a child that died as a result of domestic violence, and then to get back in their car, say, I'm done with this call, and give me the next one, and they get sent to another domestic violence call, or they get sent to a car accident, and one thing after another like that. We need to realize, and we're beginning to realize, that we need to have some downtime, and we need to have some support for these members to be able to take time to digest the experience that they just went through, and to deal with it, and not just internalize it and move on, which is, the history of law enforcement over years was, this is a job you get paid for, suck it up and move on to the next thing. And that's really not the case. That harms our people more than it helps our people. And as a result of that, that carries over into the community as well. So it's important that we deal with that. Finally, there's a recommendation for the sheriff to examine whether methods exist to use equipment with military appearance where necessary to control public disruptions and protect lives, but in a manner that reduces the possibility of instilling fear or apprehension on the part of citizens engaging in legitimate public assembly and speech. This is what they refer to as the 1033 program. The 1033 program is vast. Within the 1033 program, we are able to get vehicles. We are able to get certain body armor. We are able to get other tools like that are surplus from the military. In many cases, these are tools that we do need. These are tools that are important to the job that we perform, and they're also extremely expensive. So to get them through as surplus from the military at no cost to the county is hugely advantageous. There are some issues that come along with that. Obviously, there's been a reference to the tank that is owned by the sheriff's office. The sheriff's office does not own a tank. What we do have is what's called an MRAP. It is a surplus military vehicle. It is an armored vehicle. It is not an armed vehicle. Basically, it is a bulletproof truck. Unfortunately, it looks like a military truck. It doesn't look like a Brinks armored car, but that's really all it is. It is an armored vehicle, and it really is it's a rescue vehicle as well as a protection vehicle. In the event of an active shooter, this truck is armored to the point that we can position it between a shooter and the public to evacuate people. We can use it to get our manpower in somewhere where they could be taking fire. That is the purpose of that vehicle. It is for the protection of our staff and the protection of the public. However, it does appear to be a military vehicle because it is a military vehicle. It also has a price tag of over $1 million if we were to purchase it. That came to us at no cost to the county from the government. The 1033 program, however, also provides other very useful tools to us. We're able to get anything from filing cabinets to backpacks to clothing, any number of things. Gym equipment can come from the 1033 program. Think of anything that the military buys for any military base in the world, and when it gets surplus, it goes on to the 1033 program. So, we've gotten lockers for the locker room and things like that just save considerable amounts of money. So, we have talked about the use of the vehicle that we have. There are some options to replace it with another vehicle, which would serve the same purpose, but would not look as aggressive. The question is whether that is a legitimate expense of taxpayer money, to spend a large amount of money to have something that performs the same task, but maybe looks a little friendlier. That's something that's going to have to be considered by the people who control the purse strings. But we are committed to using such equipment in different ways, possibly deploying it not as a first line, but as a second line vehicle, so that it is ready for use if necessary, but not readily visible at all times. It's not meant to be a deterrent threat. That's not the purpose of the vehicle. But when it's needed, it is needed. And as I mentioned, our county, it's over an hour from one end to the other. So if there is an event planned where our special operations team is deployed in a standby mode, that is the vehicle that they travel in. As you can imagine, excuse me, if there were to be an incident somewhere, you can't wait an hour to get equipment to a scene. We need to have equipment there and ready to respond. And our hope is always that things go peacefully. And it's not that we send our team only to protests or to demonstrations, but our team is also deployed for very friendly, popular events. Our team is on standby for major events at the racetrack, for example. We're on standby for any large-scale celebrations, for large events at SPAC. Any place where something major could happen. And the perfect day for us is that everybody gets suited up, they go sit somewhere, and at the end of the night, they go back home and nothing has to happen. So that's what we want in every situation that we deploy to. So that is the quick overview of the plan that was provided to the county. Sheriff, if you have anything to offer, otherwise we can see what questions may be out there from the attendees.
Thank you, Under Sheriff. Well done. Dr. Precioso, also, thank you. Well explained. And the three of us will entertain any questions at this point.
Hi, I'm Sherry. I'm one of the moderators of the meetup. So I'm going to start with my own question. And I think a lot of these are going to be for the Saratoga County group. So whichever one of you wants to answer these is fine. I just wondered whether or not you've been given any feedback by the governor's office. And if not, do you anticipate any, and when?
We submitted our plan on time prior to the April 1st deadline. The state acknowledged that they were in receipt of the plan, and I have no idea if we'll get any feedback from them. Okay. We have not been told.
Barb Thomas, would you like to unmute and ask your question, please? Well, maybe she's not there anymore. So I'll ask her question. She's asking if the Saratoga County has formed a civilian review board.
I'll take that for you, Sheriff.
Okay.
No, the Sheriff's Office has not formed a civilian review board. One of the things that I happen to mention, I'll take this for the Sheriff so he doesn't have to say it, but the Sheriff's offices in New York State are unique compared to other police departments. And that's something that I tried to express early on in our discussion about police reform with our board. It may have been misquoted by the Times Union at one point, but the Executive Order 203 failed to take into account the fact that our sheriffs who run our sheriff's department are elected. And as an elected official, the public has the ultimate oversight over the sheriff's office. Every 4 years, the public, the members of the community in Saratoga County get to decide who they want to lead their sheriff's office and what policies that they want that to, in the leader that they choose. So we do not have a civilian review board. There was no recommendation to establish a civilian review board. But as I said, if the public is not happy with the direction of the sheriff's office, they do get their say every 4 years in who will lead it.
Thank you. Diane, you have a couple of questions. Would you like to pose them?
I can remember one because I can't see them anymore. In your New York State law enforcement accreditation, are the items that were listed in the Executive Order 203, are they already in the accreditation? Because I thought maybe there was more. I didn't know if all those things were the standards in the accreditation.
So the interesting thing is, there were a couple of those items that were actually recommended by the governor and that were in the Executive Order 203 that to look at, that once they made it to the Municipal Police Training Council, the Division of Criminal Justice Services, were not incorporated into the model policies for various reasons. There were also a couple things that they failed to take into account that there are discussions, for example, about hiring practices and diversifying law enforcement. We are 100% in favor of that. However, we are still bound by the civil service requirements of the state of New York, which have not yet been addressed, where we are required to hire out of the top 3 candidates on the list. We are not provided with, they are not scaled by race. They are not scaled by ethnicity. They are scaled by test score. So, although there is a recommendation, although the executive order doesn't want us to take that into account, there are still other things that need to change on the state level to make that easier for us to meet those requirements.
Thank you.
Charlotte, Christine Rude, would you like to ask your question, or I can ask yours? All right, Christine was wondering why if there was only one non-governmental employee on the Saratoga County committee.
Hi, I can take that. Essentially, the committee was appointed at the direction of the chair of the Board of Supervisors during the last year. And the decision-making process that went into identifying prospective members, that was sort of in his court. And we took the ball and ran with the ball that we were given, but no information other than the fact that we were identified as members of the board. Not sure about how to give any more information around it. We just don't have it. This was the board that was appointed by the chair of the Board of Supervisors last year.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Stacy Lamoti, I don't know if you want to ask this yourself, or I'll just ask it myself. I'll ask you. I think she was curious why there are only 2 agencies that have accreditations. I think you said Waterford and the Saratoga County. Why are the other police forces not required to meet the accreditation training programs?
I'll take that one as well, because I was the accreditation manager for several years for the sheriff's office. Accreditation, despite what a lot of people think, accreditation is not mandated in New York State. Accreditation is totally optional. It is an onerous task. To require it would likely be considered an unfunded mandate because of the amount of work, staff, and expense that goes into it. However, it was decided in Saratoga County, again, more than 30 years ago, that there is, to us, accreditation is not an option. We wish to hold ourselves to the highest standards that can be established or that are established, and then some. So our goal is always to meet and or exceed the standards established by this, but it is not a requirement. It is only a recommendation in New York State.
Okay, thank you very much. Louise, do you want to ask your question? Louise Golub? All right, I'm not exactly sure who to pose this to, but Louise was asking what happens with advice from advisory groups?
I can take that. You know, any suggestions or any comments we receive from the advisory group, we take and look at. As the undersheriff alluded to previously, our youth advisory committee over the past couple of years have made suggestions. We look at everything that's presented to us, and if it's something that's feasible that we can do, we will definitely entertain it.
I am hoping that Deb Peck-Kelleher will ask her own question since I've asked her to unmute.
Thank you. I just wanted to know what percentage of the sheriff's calls are for domestic violence? And then when you, are these calls answered by your mobile crisis team and also can you speak to the training that your staff has had on domestic violence and which county and community resources are you connecting families with?
I can tell you, most of our calls, unfortunately, are domestic violence. I have a captain that's assigned to the training for domestic violence. We work hand in hand with Wellspring. We're in constant communications with them out of Saratoga. They've provided us great training over the course of the last couple of years. And we always, you know, the captain that I have assigned to the domestic violence training and input is always looking at these cases and kind of reaching out to the people that are involved if Wellspring is not involved in it. So we're in constant contact with these people to see that they get the help that they need. But it unfortunately it is a big part of what we do in the sheriff's department on all three shifts, and we look at it very seriously.
Can I ask a follow-up? I mean, is that something that our community should be looking at as a bigger picture? Is that a growing problem, do you feel, in our county?
It's a constant problem. You know, I can't say if it continues to grow. We see our fair share of these domestic violence cases, but I can tell you, like I said, we work very closely with Wellspring in regards to that. And if there's any further help that we need, Maggie, the director, and the staff at Wellspring has been great helping us deal with that.
And when you say Wellspring, they're helping with your training and your staff, or they're also connecting with the individual families going through the crisis?
Both.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Darnell, I think you're next up with a question.
Yes. When I look at the national cases of unnecessary deaths that belong, you know, that were involved with police officers, to me, they fall into like three categories. There's the people who are genuinely scared and more or less jump the gun. Sorry about the pun. For like the young man who was shot in the stairway in New York City. And I understand how dangerous this job is. When people leave in the morning, they're not sure they're going to come back in the afternoon. It's a very dangerous job. So, but I think those deaths can be handled by those accidental deaths or whatever could be handled by increased training. The other two categories, one is blatant racism or subtle racism that just hasn't come out. And the other are people who tend to be basically schoolyard bullies who like to throw their authoritarianism around and be the authority and bully people. When you look at all of the various things on the internet, there's a whole lot of those. I want to know what your department does, and if you know of other departments that try to weed out the recruits that could be racist or that could be basically bullies. You know, for instance, like Ithaca, the city of Ithaca uses psychological tests with their recruits. So what is it you do to try to weed these people out before they're actually trained to be officers?
I'll take this, Sheriff. So what we do, what we've implemented again, we've changed our hiring practices since Sheriff Zurlo came into office. We do a extremely comprehensive background investigation on all candidates, not just candidates we're going to hire, but actually candidates that we're interviewing. So before we even make an offer of employment, we've some good screening on these people, along with a full background that we do, that our investigators do. They also take a psychological panel, which is screened, and any flags that come up on that are then referred to Dr. Prezioso's office at mental health, where it's looked at by a mental health professional, and in some cases, the person that sits for a follow-up interview with someone from mental health. And also over the last few years, we've added a polygraph exam to our background panel. So we have a member trained as a polygraph expert to basically, like you used to see in the old shows, hook them up to a lie detector. We ask them a large panel of questions, and we use that as part of our background investigation as well.
Thank you.
Thank
Jeff,
you.
I just add the psychological tests. I've got a pretty good amount of past experience using this test. It's essentially the gold standard. The state police use the same test for state troopers. State docs uses it for corrections officers, and the sheriff's office uses it for both corrections officers and deputy candidates as well. And if there are any questions that come up, I'm the one who handles this for our department. A comprehensive review of the test findings, as well as background information that the sheriff's office makes available, and putting those two data points together leads us to, I think, ultimately much better hiring decisions.
Thank you. Barb, you had a question, and as long as Dr. Prezioso is talking right now regarding Northern Rivers, you might want to pose that to him.
Sure. I have heard that Northern Rivers doesn't really go in when the person doesn't request the services, that even when, like, the sheriff's department may be there and Northern Rivers may come, that they can't really go into a residence unless that person has requested their service?
That's my understanding as well. They're a voluntary agency, so they want to be of help, they want to be of service. But if someone refuses service, if they're unwilling to speak to Northern Rivers reps on the phone, if they're unwilling to speak with them at the time that they arrive on scene, then Northern Rivers, as far as I understand it, is not in a position to enter someone's home without that person's permission.
So then what happens? How do the sheriff's deputies deal with that kind of situation where the person obviously needs some sort of mental health treatment, but doesn't recognize that they need it?
If there's I'll turn this over to the sheriff, under sheriff, but from the vantage point of the mental health system, there's a section of mental hygiene law, section 945, which grants authority to the physician who is in the job that I have to give law enforcement an order that directs that they transport a person who appears to be in need of treatment to the hospital for evaluation, even against that person's will. So if there's an assessment on the scene that the person is really posing a risk themselves or others, it seems to be imminent, there's evidence of mental illness of some kind, then what law enforcement will do is they'll contact our office. And this can be 24/7. This is, we've got on-call folks, and, so we'll have our staff respond to those calls any hour of the day or night. And based on the report of law enforcement, we will issue that order under section 945 of the mental hygiene law, and that permits law enforcement. It gives them the authority to transport the person to the hospital. Now, what can happen at that point really ends up being the determination of the hospital. This authorizes law enforcement to bring the person there, but the person once there has to meet criteria for admission, which typically includes acts or indications of dangerousness to self or others. And it's not the kind of thing where a person might say, well, I'll be dangerous next week, but right now I'm good. That's sort of not good. It needs to be an imminent threat. And at that point, the person can be admitted against their will. If the person doesn't meet criteria for admission, there are referrals given to the individual who is then free to take advantage of them. And that sometimes happens. And unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't happen, that the person will take advantage of some of the services that are available to them. I don't know if Sheriff or Undersheriff wants to add to that.
No, you're spot on, Doctor. Well, you explained it, just the process that we do. So thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that about our substance abuse program that we have. For cases of, as everybody knows, there is a substance abuse problem. It is exploded during COVID, which we anticipated. However, these things happen in private homes behind closed doors, and it's very hard to make inroads with some of those. But we have a program that we've established specific for drug overdoses, heroin overdoses, fentanyl overdoses. All of our deputies carry Narcan with them. We have the ability to reverse a heroin or fentanyl overdose if we get there quick enough. In most cases, these people are transferred to the hospital, and in a lot of cases, they leave the hospital very shortly thereafter. So we have a program where we have someone that goes and visits them the next day, and not in a law enforcement capacity, although they are members of the sheriff's office, but just to bring them resources and to offer them assistance and to let them know what resources are available for them, and to assist them with contacting those resources that needed. So that's what we're doing on that front. As you can imagine, drug abuse, substance abuse, and domestic violence go hand in hand. So those two programs within our office work together to try to get people the help that they need.
There's some terrific linkages there too. The captain who's involved with that program with the sheriff's office also sits on the Mental Health and Addictions Services and Community Services Board. So there's lots of great communication back and forth. And in fact, based on input that I received, I am including trying to secure resources for a full-time person to work with some of the other agencies to be able to assist with the program that originated under Sheriff Zurlo with the sheriff's office with follow-ups for overdoses.
Thank you. I had one other question. Because I took the survey that was a part of the original thing before you developed your recommendations. And a lot of the policies seemed really good, but I didn't know if you keep any kinds of the department keeps any kind of statistics on how they actually implement those policies and how well they do in terms of complying with the policies.
So that's part of the accreditation standard. All of those policies are actually tied to a standard in accreditation, and we have to keep documentation of how we meet those policies for each and every year. And when the committee comes in to do our assessment, normally they send 3 people that come from outside, from the state, to examine it, and they will look at our policy and they will look at the supporting documentation that we provide to show how we comply. And we actually have to show, case reports or arrest reports that actually show that we follow the policy step by step through. But this is also goes hand in hand with the recommendation for a professional standards committee in-house to have dedicated inspector level staff, not line staff, to go through and do this almost on a day-to-day basis, to review cases that come in. All of our reports get reviewed. So, any deputy that writes a report, it gets reviewed by a sergeant, it gets signed off by a captain, it goes to the records office. But to actually spot check these and say, this month we're going to look at specifically for this particular item in all domestic violence reports, to see if, to make sure that on every domestic violence case, we made a referral, whether the person wanted it or not. to see if anything is slipping through the cracks. So that's our intention going forward, to try to address that, to make sure that we are holding ourselves to the highest standards that we've already established.
Well, I think I'm noticing how late it's getting, so I'd like to thank our guests. Thank you, Sheriff Zurlo and Dr. Prezioso and Under Sheriff Castle for joining us tonight. And thank you for answering all these great questions that came from everybody. And thanks to Jackie and Diane for doing all that research into all that data and putting together that presentation too. All right, well, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for having us tonight.
Thank you very much. It
Thank
was
you.
enjoyable.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Evening.
Take care.
Good talk. Take care, folks.
Take care.
Take care.